Israel has the strongest military in the Middle East, the most potent air force. They have a navy. They have an intelligence systems that has been compared to the best in the world and second to none in that region. And by every military measure, the comparison between Israel and Hamas is simply off the charts in the direction of Israel. Why then do I say with such confidence that Israel has a real shot at losing the war to a militarily, technically inferior foe? Well, we're going to find out today. We're going to explain some things to you because in terms of winning and losing wars, very often, not even just sometimes, the side that wins is not the side that has the best technology. You don't have to look further than Vietnam or Afghanistan, either against the Soviet Union or against us, to understand that that's in fact an issue. This didn't have to be the case. This thing could have turned out a lot different than it did. But the way it's going right now, Israel is on a direct path to lose strategically. And I'm going to call on somebody here that's on our show a lot, that's one of the best in the nation at talking about anything regarding diplomacy, and that is former Ambassador Chaz Freeman. Chaz, welcome back to the show.
Glad to be here, Danny.
Well, for some people to hear that opening statement that I made here, they would like, wait, how's that even possible? There's no way that Israel can lose the war. I mean, you see this carnage and the wreckage every day in the Middle East or within Gaza Strip, and obviously that they're going to win because they're going to kill all the bad guys, right? I mean, why do you propose that that's actually not the case, that they actually could lose the war?
Well, there are a number of reasons for that. Before we get there, I think we have to recognize that something over 30,000 Palestinians have been killed. Now there's 70,000 or so maimed or wounded. Of the 30,000 who've been killed, about 70% are children or women. So that's about 21,000, I guess, out of 30,000. Israel claims it has killed 10,000 Hamas fighters. Basically, what these numbers show is that Israel considers any male in Gaza to be a Hamas fighter. Who knows how many fighters they have actually killed? There is still resistance in northern Gaza, which the Israelis have basically pummeled for 5 months. So from a military point of view, rooting out insurgents who represent the people you're brutalizing is always difficult, if not impossible. But more importantly, Israel's image is vitally important to it. And in many parts of the world, people now look at the Star of David with the same revulsion that we in the West reserve for the swastika. It is identified with genocide. Israel cannot emerge from this war with many friends. And that is notwithstanding the fact that today's Washington Post reports that there have been at least 100 expedited U.S. deliveries of arms to Israel over the period since October 7. Any doubt about American complicity in this will not withstand scrutiny given those numbers.
And I've just got to wonder that a lot of that, I think there was one aid package published at the first, but then the question has to come, and I hope they're asking these questions on the Hill: who authorized these other statements, these other shipments, and where is that money coming from? Because it has to be authorized by Congress, and I'm not sure they all have.
Well, apparently most of these shipments have been below the cutoff level for congressional approval. So they've basically broken down the shipments into little bits and pieces and moved them around the law back of Congress, because they know that there are people in Congress who don't consider this to be anything the United States ought to be engaged in. Now, we're watching film of airdrops of food, MREs, used to be called meals rejected by Ethiopians, as I recall. MREs, military rations, being dropped. These are crumbs. Basically, what we're doing is throwing crumbs at starving people who are desperate. We're going to keep a few people alive long enough to be killed by the weapons we're simultaneously supplying. This is the most incoherent policy that you could possibly imagine. So the question, who's responsible? The president is responsible. And he's being called to account by the voters.
Yeah, and fortunately, and I guess one of the reasons why these shipments are being broken up so that it doesn't trigger congressional observation, although thankfully the Post put it out there, so maybe it'll start to get some. But one of the biggest advocates in the U.S. Congress is in the Senate is Bernie Sanders, who has been pretty unequivocal in where he stands on this.
Well, I think first of all, this is something, Alex, they've been thinking about for a while, because what they see, what you see, what I see, is almost an unprecedented humanitarian disaster. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of children facing starvation. We're talking about Israeli bombs of making it impossible for humanitarian aid to get to places that is needed, that the borders are being blockaded, and aid is unable to get through. So I think what the president is doing is an important step forward, but we need to do more. We need to tell Netanyahu and his right-wing government that they're going to have to open those borders. The United States of America, and I think the rest of the world, is not going to allow hundreds of thousands of kids to starve to death. So we need a new approach to Israel. For many, many years, we have given them a lot of money. Recently, there was a vote, I voted against it, to give them another $14 billion. My view, not another nickel for Netanyahu's government, if he's going to continue this wholesale slaughter of the Palestinian people.
Now, he said in there that people are starting to come to recognize this, and that was on Sunday. Elsewhere on Sunday, it appeared maybe finally the White House was getting the message when they sent out the vice president to say this.
And given the immense scale of suffering in Gaza, there must be an immediate ceasefire for at least the next 6 weeks, which is what is currently on the table.
So that was on Sunday. Then yesterday, Netanyahu made a statement about what they were going to do, and I don't think you're going to hear the word ceasefire in his speech here.
The war continues and will continue until the end, until we achieve all our goals. The cruelty of the kidnappers, eliminating Hamas, and ensuring that it will no longer pose a threat to Israel, sparing no one. We will persevere and continue our relentless fight on land, sea, and air until we achieve total and undeniable victory.
So I've got one more thing to show you here in a second, which really gets to the heart of why I say that Israel has a real shot at losing the war. But before I get that, I wonder if you could just kind of touch, especially as a diplomat and somebody who's been working behind the scenes with politics as well as international relations, when you see a very prominent U.S. senator, former presidential candidate, you see the vice president of the United States saying what they said publicly, and then a day and a half, 2 days later, you see the result on the ground with Netanyahu. What does that tell you is going on diplomatically?
It tells me that this is all symbolic for American domestic political purposes. This is the response to the Michigan primary, basically. I'm talking about the airdrops. That's all they are. Now, they're not adequate from any point of view. They're not going to save very many lives. Bernie Sanders is a courageous man, and he is responding to what he sees as a shift in American public opinion. And I think many people will applaud that. I want to note that Vice President Harris, after talking about the necessity for a 6-week ceasefire, will stop the genocide and feed you a bit so we can kill you in 6 weeks. This is not a sensible policy. She went on to press Hamas for a ceasefire, as though Hamas was the one launching attacks on Israeli forces. What are they supposed to do? Just lie down and let themselves be killed? Israel has the ability to stop this war. We have the ability to stop Israel from conducting it, because without those 100 shipments of arms, Israel cannot do a thing. Those arms, the list of weapons provided is awesome. The details are in the Washington Post story. All kinds of bombs, precision-guided munitions, and so forth and so on. And these are the things that have been used to level Gaza and kill and maim something like 120,000 people.
So well, better question. How do you think that the people in the region outside of Israel, in the Arab world, or really even in Western Europe for that matter, because I've seen some polls that imply that out beyond the government recognition of the positions, the various Western governments, that the people of Western Europe are being increasingly revolted and revulsion by what they see, in a lot of these clips we keep showing here of the destruction and the deaths, especially of the women and children. But you see that the governments continue to go on and say the same things. And at some point, don't they have to actually listen to their publics?
Well, this is a very real question. In the United States, something approaching 80% of members of the Democratic Party want a ceasefire, permanent ceasefire, not a temporary ceasefire. Even Republicans, who tend to be very pro-Israel, are almost 60% in favor of a ceasefire. So this is a case where American political elites have made a deliberate decision. They prefer campaign donations from Jewish plutocrats to listening to the public. They prefer their own careers to doing the right thing. Bernie Sanders is obviously an exception. And when you look beyond the United States, as I said earlier, we are losing every aspect of our moral authority. People know that this war is ours as much as Israel's. And they see through the sort of tricks that are being played with airdropped MREs. So, as I said, Israel's going to emerge from this not fit for polite company much of anywhere. And by the way, the same figures apply in Europe as apply here. The public is against this war. The elite remains silent.
I saw an interesting development a few days back when George Galloway in the UK in a special parliamentary election overwhelmingly defeated all of his opponents in that race. And he explicitly said, this is for Gaza, because the population, the numbers bear out that that's what a lot of the people say. And he was absolutely excoriated across the board in the British media. But it still keeps going back. But the people are saying something different when they actually cast their votes. The question is, do you think that kind of thing could happen here if the elites keep going in the direction they're going, but the people are moving in a different direction? Could it have an impact in the votes?
I think this is a much deeper issue than Gaza. I think if you want to ask why so many people support Donald Trump, it's because they think he would crush the elite. The elites they see as ignoring their views. And not just on this issue, but on a whole variety of issues. And I think this is probably the most egregious case at the moment, but it's not the only one. So this is a deeper phenomenon. And, we're going into an election in which Joe Biden, who has diminishing enthusiasm behind him and increasing opposition, is going up against a master demagogue, Donald Trump. We will have Trump as our next president. Biden, if he really doesn't want Trump to be president, should step aside because he's not going to defeat him. I'm not sure who could. But if you think that Trump would be a great president, of course, you should be delighted by this. If you don't think that, then perhaps you should counsel Mr. Biden to step aside as he himself said he would when he ran the last time. He said he was a bridge to the future. Yeah. And he would give way to a younger man or woman after one term. I guess, we see clips of him reading stuff, referring to countries, getting them confused. He did a statement about the airdrops in which he confused Palestine or Gaza with Ukraine.
Yeah.
This is not reassuring, and it's not good for the country. And
it doesn't. It seems though I mean, we're not the only ones that can see that with electoral realities. I'm sure behind the scenes that they've got to be recognizing the truth of what's going on. I mean, they see it on the ground. It seems like especially if they realize we're continuing going down this path is going to be an electoral loser, that even if they didn't do the morality, which should be the overwhelming drive, that should be the primary thing, no matter what the electoral consequences may be. Maybe I'm living in a fantasy world, but that's what it should be. But even if they're just going after self-interest in the votes, it seems like it would be in the interest of the president himself to say, all right, not just to say that we're looking for a ceasefire, but to actually put some teeth in it. And like Bernie Sanders said, you're not going to get another nickel. You're not going to get one more plane load of stuff until you start doing things different on the ground. And as I say many times, Ambassador, if they would just, if our money was contingent upon Israel requiring their IDF, their military, to conduct these operations the same way we obligate our forces to conduct operations in urban areas where there are civilians, where we actually prioritize protecting and taking care of the civilian population, not just ignoring them and killing them wantonly and starving them to death. If we just held them to that, it seems like that would be more of a political winner. But I don't see any evidence that the Biden administration is going to do anything except say whatever it needs to and then do whatever Israel asks it to do. And I really find that puzzling.
Well, if you remember, there was a famous question asked by Bill Clinton after one meeting with Netanyahu. Said, who's the superpower, us or them? They do whatever the hell they want. They don't pay any attention to us, and they feel they are entitled to our support, regardless. We have it within our power to stop this. The fact that we don't use that power, don't use that leverage, makes us look weak everywhere in the world, makes us look like a patsy. So I think patience with this is pretty much run out overseas. And I think in many quarters of the United States, it's running out too. And it's having a real impact on our society. Domestically, it's become one of the most polarizing subjects. We've seen university presidents toppled because they didn't toe the line. We've seen really absurd statements about, kill all the Palestinians,
Right.
made by our politicians, basically endorsing genocide. And it's very clear, to go to your point about trying to minimize civilian casualties, that the Israelis have absolutely no interest in this. Their purposes are served. The fewer Palestinians there are, the better they feel. The fewer Palestinians there are, the happier they are, the safer they feel. You cannot occupy another people and rule by terror and expect them to just lie down and take it. And so,
Well, yeah,
so
and
this
that actually gets me to the next point that I was going to make here. That's a perfect segue, actually, because my premise at the start of this was that Israel could lose the war, which seems incomprehensible and just fantastical to some people to even think that's a possibility. But there is a very real path that this could go down. And first of all, let me show you something that Netanyahu says, which on the surface of it sounds that it would lead to the opposite conclusion. But we'll talk about the reason why it doesn't on the backside.
Once we begin the Rafah operation, the intense phase of the fighting is weeks away from completion. Not months, weeks away from completion. And that is, we've already destroyed 18 out of the 24 Hamas terrorist battalions. So we have and 4 of them are concentrated in Rafah. We can't leave the last Hamas stronghold without taking care of it. Obviously, we have to do it. But understand, too, that I've asked the Army to submit to me a double plan. First, to evacuate, to enable the evacuation of the Palestinian civilians in Gaza, and obviously, second, to destroy the remaining Hamas battalions. That gets us a real distance towards the completion of our victory. And that we're not going to give it up. If we have a deal, it'll be delayed somewhat, but it'll happen. If we don't have a deal, we'll do it anyway. It has to be done because total victory is our goal, and total victory is within reach, not months away, weeks away, once we begin the operation.
Now, The reason why I put up on the screen there one of the comments from one of our viewers here, because that's something that is commonly believed, is that, hey, Israel has fought all these wars in the past and they were always little, but they always found a way to win. That was against a conventional army, and the conditions were very different here. But to the point that you were, I think, starting to make before we went into that clip there, what Netanyahu thinks he's doing here is going to destroy Hamas. But even if he somehow did manage to kill all the fighters, and I think that's nearly a physical impossibility, but theoretically, let's say that he did, by killing so many tens of thousands and wounding, as you said, 70 or 80,000, over 100,000 people, innocent people killed and wounded, and the ability to survive for all the remainder of that 2 million people is being systematically destroyed, so that it's long term, that they have no hope for even existing. Under those conditions, whatever you think the threat of Hamas was before October 7th is now 100 times worse going forward. So even after these weeks have passed, then the threat to Israel will be higher than it was before October 7th, in my view. How do you see that?
Well, if you look at the history here that you put up on the screen, Israel has been victorious in wars. Yes, surprise attack in Suez in 56, surprise attack on Egypt and Syria in 67, and a successful response to the Egyptian counterattack across the Suez Canal in 1973. Yes, that's all true. But is Israel secure? I mean, manifestly, it is not. And it goes to the point that you cannot indefinitely oppress and terrorize a population and expect them to just take it. If Hamas weren't there, there would be another organization that arose, probably more extreme. So, this is a losing proposition. The only way that Israel can achieve security is by doing a deal with the Palestinians that leaves the Palestinians with no motive to attack Israel. Right. And by the way, the Palestinians are not limited to Palestine itself. Israel drove out huge numbers into neighboring countries, and there are Palestinians all over the world. And many of them are being motivated now to go after Israel. A whole new generation of Palestinians, many of them in foreign lands, not in Palestine, now has the hatred required to go after Israel and its supporters. And there is a real danger. There are two dangers here. One is, of course, that the war will expand further in the Middle East. It's already involved Yemen. It's involved assassinations by us in violation of Iraqi sovereignty, and it could well spread to Iran. It could go north into Lebanon,
right?
And but aside from that, it could become worldwide. We could be back to the mid-60s with Palestinian terrorists knocking off supporters of Israel who aren't Israelis, who are maybe Jewish or maybe Christian evangelicals who support Israel. This is an entirely reasonable possibility, and it's scary, I think.
And it does, and that's kind of one of the things that kind of circles back again. We talked about in the first part that diplomatically, we keep having all these leaders keep saying these things that are just manifestly inaccurate, and the blanket support and the claims, that with some of our politicians here that, we want them to be careful. We want them to have targeted operations, et cetera, but they're not doing anything. Well, there has to be people in the Pentagon as well that should be advising the president that there is no military path to success here for the very reasons we talked about, and the risk that, of course, the continual risk that more Americans get killed, as did happen already in Jordan in that strike that near Syria, or our other troops in Iraq and in Syria that are still under those threats, or that this thing could actually expand into Hezbollah in the northern part, into Lebanon, which apparently the risk is not necessarily greater that Hezbollah would attack into Israel, but that Israel may attack into Hezbollah. And then we have an even bigger escalation, putting our troops at more risk, putting the Red Sea at more risk. And at some point, just out of self-interest, doesn't the White House have to finally take some action that benefits our country and not facilitates something that's moving in the opposite direction?
Well, to your point about Hezbollah and Lebanon, there are reports that Israeli armor is being concentrated on the Lebanese border. And if that is the case, then there is a danger that Israel will expand the war. Why? Because Hezbollah has driven many Israelis out of northern Israel for safety reasons. And they are a powerful, of course, constituency that has to be responded to by the Israeli government. But the answer to this, to widen the war, which is advocated by some in Israel, would, I think, be disastrous for Israel. And it would not do anything for us either. Whether the president is in fact getting sound military advice is a real question. Every indication is that he's surrounded by, to put it mildly, sycophants, people who tell him what he wants to hear, not what he needs to hear. We saw this in the run-up to the fruitless search for WMD in Iraq, where George W. Bush didn't want to hear anything that contradicted the advice of his senior advisors, which he bought into, that there was WMD. And Saddam is a bad guy and we got to get him out of power and so forth. Is there any evidence that Mr. Biden is receiving sound advice from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, from military advisors, or is he the prisoner of this little group of people that he brought with him from Congress?
That's not a very reassuring or warm thought, but it unfortunately seems closer to the probable truth than the contrary here. In the last few minutes we have, I wonder if you can just kind of tell us a couple of things. One is, if the status quo maintains, meaning that the White House doesn't do anything different, they just keep on with this rhetorical statements, but continue sending shipments without hesitation or delay. What do you think happens in like the next 6 months? How does this play out there? And then alternatively, if the president, discovered some sanity and some logic and said, "No, what, this is not working out for us diplomatically or militarily, we need to cut this off," what should he do? So those two things.
Well, first, if this just goes on the way it is, the costs of it will mount, not only in terms of dead Palestinians, but the probability of global terrorism directed at Israel and its supporters, including Americans, will steadily increase. So that's the first thing. Second, the war may well widen, as we've discussed. It may be widened by Israeli action. It may be widened by people who, like the Yemenis, can't bear to see what Israel is doing to other Arabs, Muslims. So there's that. Domestically, we're going into an election. As I said, I don't see how Mr. Biden can win that election for a variety of reasons. So we'll get Mr. Trump as president, most likely. And nobody knows what he will do. I mean, the one thing you can count on is he'll do something unexpected. Maybe right, maybe wrong. Who knows? The other thing is that the longer this goes on, the less clout influence the United States will have overseas. Our word is now, for the reasons I mentioned, the fact that Joe Biden feels obliged to take orders from Netanyahu and can't do anything about Netanyahu basically spitting in the face of the United States on the issues in Gaza, just keeps funneling more money and weapons to Netanyahu to go on doing what we've told him he shouldn't do. This makes us look incredibly weak.
Yeah.
I think, quite aside from that, our complicity in genocide, which is what this is, there's no mincing words anymore about this. If you doubted that, look at the so-called Flower Massacre. That was as though the Israeli Defense Forces, couldn't wait to let people starve. They had to shoot them before they died of starvation. This is not seen internationally as anything but a horror.
Yeah.
And we are complicit. And this spills over to issues like Ukraine. Why should anybody support us on Ukraine if we apparently have the double standards that we do? We're against Russian abuses of human rights in Ukraine, as we should be, but we don't care when they're inflicted on Palestinians. It doesn't affect our behavior.
So what should we do if suddenly the president was willing to listen to some reason? What would be the path? What should we do given all the realities and the hard difficulties and the bad path we've had? How can we turn the ship around here?
He should put the interests of the country ahead of his own vainglorious pursuit of re-election. He should confront Israel. He should deny Israel weapons until it does the right thing. He should not send people to the World Court to argue Israel's case. He should stop protecting Israel in the United Nations Security Council, where we are almost alone in trying to defend the indefensible. He should live up to American values, which are not the same as Israeli values. It used to be said that we supported Israel for several reasons. One, we shared values. Well, their values are the values of the Ku Klux Klan. And I don't support the Ku Klux Klan, and I know you don't. And I don't think most Americans do either. And I think we should not support Israel on that ground. Second, we supported them because we thought they were useful to us strategically. But they are taking us down with them globally. Yeah. And in effect, we have made a choice. We prefer to back Israel over backing the international system, the rule of law, the United Nations system that we created after World War II, the rule-bound order, if you will, not the one that is dictated by Washington, but the one that reflects the common aspirations of mankind.
Yeah.
We have chosen Israel over that international system. We're prepared to destroy the international system in order to allow Israel to continue to conduct genocide. I think that is truly sick. And if the president wanted to have a place in history, he would take decisive action to bring Israel to heel.
Yeah. The sad truth is that he's going to be in history one way or the other. He's going to either be in history for doing what you suggested he should do or for what he fails to do, because I think one way or the other, there's going to be a place there. And I pray to God and I hope that he does choose the right path here, but only time is going to tell. Well, Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for providing clarity on these issues, these very complicated issues, lots of emotions tied to this, and people have a lot of different views. But I think that the bottom line is you're illuminating here. There is trouble for America. There's trouble for Palestine. And there's even trouble for Israel if they don't change course.
Absolutely.
Well, and we're going to continue to monitor this because, unfortunately, this is not going away anytime soon. And if there are any changes, we will definitely keep you appraised of those. And we'll continue to have people like Ambassador Freeman on to come and give you the no kidding skinny on this. Thank you very much. And we're going to ask you, we actually have a surprise additional show today. We have David Sachs back on our show again today. He's actually in Washington, D.C. to attend an event and has graciously decided or allowed us to put him on the television or our show today to talk about a really interesting tweet that he has pinned on his Twitter feed right now. You'll probably want to go check that out and definitely be back 2 p.m. Not long from now. We will be live with David Sachs. Well, thanks, and we'll see you very shortly on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.